Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're really covering the spectrum.
Yeah.
From human trafficking to
Presidential politics.
cybercrime, financial fraud, even the opioid epidemic.
It's a lot.
We've got it all.
Yeah, it's a real mix of current events, you know? And you might be wondering how it all connects.
Right.
But I think as we dig in, deeper, you'll find there are some surprising threads that tie these seemingly, totally disparate stories together.
Okay, I'm intrigued already.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to kind of sift through all this information and pull out the most fascinating and important pieces for you.
And believe me, there are some
Correct.
real head scratchers and jaw droppers in here.
I believe you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with a case that I think is both disturbing and really makes you think.
Okay.
The Sissonville adoption case.
Yeah.
Where this couple was accused of, just horrific abuse against their 5 adopted children.
Yeah, this case is truly heartbreaking. Jean K. Whitefeather and Donald Ray Lantz adopted 5 black siblings.
Right. And what seemed like a heartwarming story.
Right.
Just really quickly turned into a nightmare.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what went wrong, Authorities were called to their home after a neighbor found 2 of the teens locked in a shed, and the conditions were just horrible.
Oh, yeah.
No food, water, or sanitation.
And this wasn't just an isolated incident either.
Right.
There were reports from neighbors about the kids being forced to do hard labor on the couple's property.
Oh, wow.
Carrying heavy objects, constantly just appearing to be under duress.
One neighbor, Joyce Bailey, even testified that the kids always just looked afraid.
Yeah.
And the oldest daughter's testimony was just gut-wrenching.
Absolutely.
She talked about being forced to stand for hours just to avoid falling asleep.
Yeah.
And just constant physical and verbal abuse.
It paints a very grim picture of what these children went through.
Yeah.
Now, the defense attorney argued that the couple was overwhelmed by the challenges of caring for children with, alleged past trauma and mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So they tried to portray them as, well-intentioned but ill-equipped.
Right. But the evidence presented in court really kind of contradicted that narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah. Surveillance footage showed the children confined to that shed.
Right.
Forced to do grueling tasks without any supervision or care.
Yeah.
And multiple witnesses, including those who knew the children before the adoption,
Right.
disputed the couple's claims, suggesting a pattern of systemic abuse and neglect.
It's hard to reconcile those 2 versions of the story. The evidence seems to point to something far more sinister
Exactly.
than just struggling parents.
And this case has ignited a much-needed conversation about the potential for racial bias in the adoption system.
Right.
It makes you wonder, if these children's race played a role in how their situation was handled.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and it raises so many questions about how we can better protect these vulnerable children, especially those from marginalized communities.
Right.
And ensure that the adoption process is actually serving their best interests.
Yeah. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah.
But this case certainly shines a light on the need for greater scrutiny and reform within the adoption system.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
From a local story to somebody who's been making headlines nationally, even globally.
Sure.
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's back in the political arena, and he's already making waves with his plans for what he's calling day 1 back in office.
Yes, his day 1 agenda.
Day 1.
It's certainly ambitious.
Yeah.
And some might say even audacious.
Yeah.
He's been very vocal about using executive orders to just swiftly undo a lot of the Biden administration's policies.
So he wants to just hit the ground running,
Yeah.
executive order,
Right.
but even a president's power has its limits.
Oh, for sure.
So let's dive into some of these policies
Yeah.
and unpack, what he can realistically achieve on day 1 versus what's likely to get bogged down in legal battles.
Okay, that's a great way to approach this, because while some actions can be taken quickly through executive orders,
Yeah.
a lot of these proposals
Yeah.
will likely face legal challenges and require congressional approval. It's important to separate the rhetoric from the reality.
Okay, so let's start with immigration.
Right.
He's talking about a major crackdown.
Right. He's appointed Tom Homan as his board czar,
Okay.
who's his former acting ICE director.
Right.
And Holman has already hinted at a shock and awe approach to deportations, targeting undocumented immigrants with criminal records,
Wow.
particularly in sanctuary cities.
He's even floated the idea of declaring a national emergency and using the military to help with border security, which seems pretty extreme.
It's definitely a controversial approach.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of tariffs.
Right.
Trump has said he plans to impose a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Mexico and Canada.
Wow, wouldn't that spark a massive trade war?
It certainly has the potential to. Both Mexico and Canada have already voiced their strong opposition to this idea, so it would be a risky move with potentially far-reaching economic consequences.
Okay, and what about the war in Ukraine? He claims he can end it within 24 hours if elected.
That's a bold claim.
Yeah.
And he hasn't really explained how he plans to do it.
No.
He's also been vague about whether he wants Ukraine or Russia to win.
Right.
Which has made a lot of people nervous.
It's a very complex situation.
Very.
And his ambiguity on that point hasn't exactly inspired confidence in his ability to handle it effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It feels like he's oversimplifying a very complex geopolitical situation.
Yeah.
Resolving the war in Ukraine would require, a deep understanding of the historical context,
Right.
the current political dynamics, the various actors involved, and, a nuanced diplomatic approach.
Speaking of complex issues, he's also vowed to end what he calls the Green New Deal atrocities
Oh, yeah.
and the electric vehicle mandate.
Right.
But the thing is, the Green New Deal was never actually passed into law.
Right.
And there is no federal mandate for electric vehicles. So what is he actually talking about?
It seems he's using those terms as shorthand for any climate and energy policies he disagrees with, like the Inflation Reduction Act.
Oh, okay.
It's more about rhetoric than specific policy proposals.
So it's more about kind of signaling his stance on climate change
Yeah.
than about actual concrete actions he would take.
That seems to be the case. Yeah, he's playing to his base and tapping into existing anxieties about climate policy.
Yeah.
But it's unclear what specific actions he would take to achieve these goals.
Okay, so let's move on to a story that really highlights, I think, the growing threat of cybercrime.
Okay.
The case of Asif William Rahman,
Right.
former CIA analyst,
Yeah.
who pleaded guilty to sharing highly sensitive national defense information.
Yeah, this case isn't just about one rogue analyst.
Right.
It raises some really unsettling questions about the security of classified information in an increasingly digital world.
And get this, he didn't just share this information privately.
Right.
He posted it publicly on social media.
Publicly.
Can you believe that?
It's almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
But it highlights the vulnerabilities we face in the digital age. We're talking about details regarding a U.S. ally and their plans against a foreign adversary. Information that could put lives at risk and severely damage U.S. foreign relations.
And he didn't just casually post this stuff either. He went to great lengths to cover his tracks.
Oh, yeah.
Deleting journal entries, destroying electronic devices, even trying to create a false narrative.
He clearly knew the gravity of his actions and the potential consequences.
Yeah.
But despite his attempts at deception, he was eventually caught, which speaks to the sophistication of our intelligence and investigative agencies.
It's a reminder that even in the digital realm,
Yeah.
actions have consequences.
For sure.
And our law enforcement agencies are constantly evolving to meet the challenges of cybercrime.
Absolutely. This case studies is a wake-up call about the importance of cybersecurity, not just for government agencies, but for individuals and businesses as well.
Okay, speaking of cautionary tales, our next story takes us into the world of human smuggling.
Yeah, this case really exposes the brutality and just callousness of those who profit from the desperation of others.
Right.
We're talking about Herminia Serrano Piedra and Oscar Angel Monroy Elsabar,
Okay.
leaders of a human smuggling ring that was ultimately dismantled by law enforcement.
They were sentenced to over 10 years in prison
Yeah.
for smuggling hundreds of undocumented individuals into the U.S.
Hundreds.
And their methods were truly shocking.
Yeah.
Hiding migrants in suitcases, tractor trailers, even water tankers.
It's hard to fathom the level of cruelty involved in treating human beings as mere cargo.
Right.
They even referred to the migrants as boxes, packages, or pieces,
Wow.
which speaks volumes about their dehumanizing mindset.
And it wasn't just about moving people across the border. This ring was also laundering money using what are called straw persons to accept the smuggling proceeds.
Right. Straw persons are basically individuals who allow their names to be used for financial transactions, often without their knowledge or with minimal involvement, to conceal the true source of the funds. It's a common tactic used in money laundering schemes.
So they were running a sophisticated criminal enterprise that spanned multiple countries
Yeah.
and involved a complex web of financial transactions.
Exactly. This case highlights the intricate and often transnational nature of human smuggling networks.
Right.
And the challenges law enforcement faces in dismantling them.
It definitely underscores the need for continued vigilance, international cooperation, and innovative investigative techniques to combat these criminal organizations.
Absolutely. These are not victimless crimes. They put lives at risk and have devastating consequences for individuals, families, and communities.
Okay, let's shift gears again
Okay.
to an issue that continues to plague our nation,
Yeah.
the opioid crisis.
Right.
This time, the spotlight is on Walgreens, one of the largest pharmacy chains in the country,
Right.
which is facing a massive lawsuit from the Justice Department.
This case is significant because it alleges that Walgreens knowingly filled millions of unlawful prescriptions for controlled substances,
Wow.
essentially prioritizing profits over patient safety.
And we're not talking about minor oversights here. The lawsuit claims that Walgreens dispensed excessive quantities of opioids,
Right.
allowed early refills, and filled prescriptions for the dangerous Trinity combination of drugs.
Yes, an opioid, a benzodiazepine, and a muscle relaxant.
And that's a combination that can be incredibly dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. Yeah, even fatal.
The lawsuit alleges that Walgreens ignored numerous red flags,
Yeah.
warnings from their own pharmacists, internal data, even reports from law enforcement.
Right.
And they continued to dispense these drugs, fueling the opioid epidemic and contributing to patient deaths.
It's a disturbing reminder that even seemingly trustworthy institutions can be complicit in harmful practices when profits are at stake.
All right, now let's kind of zoom in on a more local crime story that's been making headlines in Chicago. The FBI's search for Gary Lilburn Llewellyn and Javon J. Stingley, who are wanted in connection with separate carjacking incidents.
These weren't just ordinary car thefts. These were violent carjackings where the suspects used firearms to threaten their victims.
Right.
And the FBI is offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to their arrests and warns the public that these individuals are considered armed and dangerous.
And these cases are part of a larger trend, right?
Absolutely.
Chicago has seen a surge in carjackings in recent years.
Yeah.
And it's creating a lot of fear and anxiety among residents.
Yeah. These cases underscore the need for effective crime prevention strategies and community-based solutions to address the root causes of violent crime.
Right.
It's not just about catching the perpetrators, it's about creating a safer environment where these crimes are less likely to occur in the first place.
That's an important point.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already, but we still have a few more stories to unpack.
Yeah, these might be shorter snippets, but they're no less intriguing. First up, we have Joseph Smith, who was sentenced for stealing over $450,000 in disability benefits from a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, suffering from ALS.
It's hard to imagine anything more callous than stealing from a disabled veteran.
I agree. It's a blatant betrayal of trust and a reminder that we need to do more to protect our veterans from exploitation.
Next, we have Roscoe McMillan, who is wanted for wire and mail fraud in connection with a life insurance scheme.
Right. He was running this fake ministry as a front to defraud insurance companies,
Okay.
collecting millions of dollars in payouts by obtaining group life insurance policies for people who weren't actually affiliated with his ministry.
And many of these individuals were seriously ill and died within a year of being added to the policies, which raised red flags for the insurance companies.
Absolutely.
It's a classic case of somebody exploiting a system for personal gain, and the FBI is still searching for him.
Yeah. It highlights the need for greater vigilance and oversight within the insurance industry to prevent these kinds of scams, as well as the importance of holding those who perpetrate these crimes accountable.
And finally, we have a case that's particularly disturbing
Yeah.
because it involves the sexual exploitation of a minor.
Right.
Benjamin Coney, a former minor league football coach,
Yeah.
and his wife, Emily Grace Brinley,
Right.
were sentenced to a combined 30 years for child sex crimes.
They use the internet to entice a minor into unlawful sexual activities, which underscores the dangers children can face online and the importance of protecting them from predators.
This case is a stark reminder that we need to be vigilant about online safety,
Yeah.
educate children about the potential dangers, and work to create a safer online environment for everyone.
Absolutely. These are complex issues that require a multifaceted approach involving parents, educators, law enforcement, and technology companies working together to create a safer digital world for children.
Okay, we've covered a lot of heavy stuff in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to go back to Donald Trump's day one plans because honestly, some of them are just so out there.
Yeah, it's true. His policy proposals often seem designed to just grab attention and provoke reactions rather than offer realistic solutions to complex problems.
Like, remember when he talked about ending birthright citizenship?
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge constitutional issue.
Right. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil trying to change that would require a constitutional amendment, which is a very lengthy and difficult process.
So it's more of a campaign promise
Yeah.
than a realistic policy goal.
It seems that way.
Hmm.
It's likely to face major legal challenges and opposition from both sides of the aisle.
And then there's his claim that he can end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours.
Right, that one raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah, to say the least. He's never actually explained how he plans to achieve that.
Right.
It feels like he's oversimplifying a very complex geopolitical situation.
Definitely. The war in Ukraine involves multiple actors, complex historical and political dynamics, and deeply entrenched interests. Resolving it would require a lot more than a snap of the fingers.
And it's not like he has a clear plan for what an end to the war would even look like. He's been vague about whether he wants Ukraine or Russia to win.
Yeah, his ambiguity on that point has been a cause for concern among both supporters and critics. It's a delicate situation, and his statements haven't exactly instilled confidence in his ability to handle it effectively.
Okay, so let's move on to something a little less heavy.
Okay.
Trump has also talked about some less expected policies,
Yeah.
like giving green cards to college graduates and expanding H-1B visas for tech workers.
Those proposals actually align with the views of some in the tech industry, who argue that attracting and retaining skilled workers from overseas is essential for economic growth.
It seems a bit out of character for someone who's generally known for his hardline stance on immigration.
It does seem like a departure from his usual rhetoric.
Yeah.
But it's worth noting that he's also talked about tightening restrictions on other types of visas. So it's not a complete shift in his overall immigration policy.
And of course, he's also promised to bring back some of his signature policies,
Right.
like the ban on transgender individuals serving in the military.
That policy was highly controversial when he first implemented it, and it's likely to face similar backlash this time around.
Yeah.
It's seen by many as discriminatory and harmful to transgender individuals who wish to serve their country.
It feels like we're in for a wild ride if he actually tries to implement all of these policies.
There's definitely a lot of uncertainty and potential for both positive and negative consequences.
Yeah.
It's a situation that warrants close attention and careful analysis.
Well, the one thing's for sure, Trump's return to office is going to be anything but boring.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
It's likely to be a period of significant change,
Yeah.
both domestically and internationally.
Right.
And as always, we'll be here to help you navigate the complexities
Yes.
and make sense of it all.
Absolutely. All right, stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll unpack even more intriguing stories and uncover those surprising connections that tie everything together.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back. We've got more to unpack in this wild world of current events. Remember how we talked about Donald Trump's potentially chaotic day one?
Oh, yeah, like he could just snap his fingers and change everything overnight.
Right.
It felt a little bit like a movie plot, honestly.
Exactly. And that sense of dramatic upheaval actually ties in with some of the other stories we're about to dive into.
Okay.
Think about it. A former CIA analyst going rogue,
Right.
a massive opioid lawsuit, even the human smuggling case.
Yeah, you're right. There's this underlying theme of systems being disrupted or people taking advantage of those disruptions.
Right. And often that disruption is driven by a desire for power or control, whether it's political power, financial gain, or even control over other people's lives.
Right.
So let's kind of keep that theme in mind as we explore these next few cases.
Okay, so let's start with Benjamin Coney and Emily Grace Brindley.
Okay.
This one's particularly disturbing because it involves the exploitation of a minor right.
It's a heartbreaking reminder that predators often target the most vulnerable among us. As a refresher, Coney was a minor league football coach, and he and his wife Brindley were convicted of online enticement of a minor.
Right.
They used the internet to manipulate their victim, and they were ultimately sentenced to a combined 30 years in federal prison.
And what makes this case even more chilling is that Coney held a position of authority and trust. He was a coach someone parents and children would naturally look up to.
Exactly, and he violated that trust
Yeah.
in the most horrific way imaginable.
Right.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the darker side of human nature and how someone could exploit a position of power for such malicious purposes.
It really does. And it makes you think about how we can better protect children from predators, especially in settings where they should feel safe, like youth sports.
Absolutely. It underscores the importance of background checks, open communication between parents and children, and ongoing education about the warning signs of abuse. We can't just assume that these spaces are inherently safe.
Yeah.
We need to be proactive in creating a culture of vigilance and prevention.
Okay, let's shift gears from a deeply troubling case to one that might seem more like a classic white-collar crime.
Okay.
But it's no less unsettling. Let's talk about Roscoe McMillan, the man accused of running a fake ministry to defraud insurance companies.
Ah, yes, the case of the sham ministry. It's a fascinating example of someone exploiting a system for personal gain.
Right.
And it exposes some real vulnerabilities within the insurance industry. Remember, he set up this organization called Chosen Outreach Ministries.
Right, and then he used this fake ministry as a cover to obtain life insurance policies for people who weren't actually part of his organization.
Exactly. And many of these individuals were seriously ill and died within a year of being added to the policies,
Right.
which raised some serious red flags.
It sounds like he was betting on people's misfortune so that he could collect the death benefits.
It does appear that way. And it resulted in millions of dollars in fraudulent payouts. The craziest part is that he was granted free trial release and then vanished.
He pulled a disappearing act,
I know, right?
like something out of a movie.
It does have a certain cinematic quality to it, doesn't it?
It does.
But it's also a reminder that financial fraud can have devastating real-world consequences.
Right.
It can hurt individuals, businesses, and the overall economy.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was able to disappear while on pretrial release raises questions about the effectiveness of our judicial system.
You're right. It makes you wonder about the checks and balances in place to prevent this kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are definitely some lessons to be learned from this case, both for the insurance industry and for law enforcement agencies.
Okay, so last but not least, we have the case of Joseph Smith, the man convicted of stealing disability benefits from a U.S. Marine Corps veteran with ALS.
This is a story that hits on multiple levels of betrayal. Not only did Smith steal from a veteran, but he stole from someone suffering from a debilitating illness.
And he got away with it for years, stealing over $450,000.
It's a truly despicable act, and it rightfully sparked outrage. It makes you wonder what kind of person would take advantage of someone in such a vulnerable position.
I know it's hard to comprehend that level of callousness. And it raises questions about the systems we have in place to safeguard benefits and prevent fraud.
Absolutely. Clearly, there were vulnerabilities that allowed Smith to get away with this crime for so long. This case should prompt a serious review of those systems and a renewed commitment to protecting vulnerable individuals from financial exploitation.
You're right. We can't let this happen again.
Exactly. This is about more than just punishing the perpetrator. It's about ensuring that the people who need these benefits the most are the ones who receive them. It's about upholding our commitment to those who have served our country and protecting them from those who would seek to exploit their vulnerability.
Okay, so we've explored cases of human trafficking, political posturing, cybercrime, financial fraud, and even the opioid crisis.
We have.
It feels like we've seen a lot of darkness and brokenness in these stories.
It's true, we've encountered some pretty unsettling aspects of human behavior. But I think it's important to remember that for every story of corruption or cruelty, there are countless stories of resilience, compassion, and hope.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get bogged down in the negativity, but we need to maintain a sense of perspective and remember that we have the power to make a difference.
And I think that's where our earlier conversation about trust comes back into play. If we want to build a better future, a future where these kinds of stories become less frequent, we need to start by rebuilding trust in our institutions, in our leaders, and in each other.
But how do we even begin to do that? It feels like such a massive undertaking.
It is a big challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. It starts with each of us in our own communities, in our own interactions. It's about being honest, being transparent, being accountable, and being willing to listen to and engage with those who hold different perspectives.
It's about setting an example both in our personal life and in our engagement with the wider world.
Exactly. And it's about demanding those same qualities from our leaders, our institutions, and the systems that govern our lives.
Yeah.
We need to hold them to a higher standard and refuse to accept anything less than integrity and accountability.
So it's about both individual actions and systemic change working in tandem.
Precisely. Rebuilding trust is a long and difficult process, but it's essential if we want to create a more just, equitable, and hopeful future.
And on that note, we'll take a short break to reflect on these weighty issues. When we come back, we'll explore some potential solutions and pathways towards a more trustworthy world. Man, we've covered some heavy topics in this deep dive,
Yeah.
from human trafficking and cybercrime to the opioid crisis and, all the political maneuvering.
Yes, a lot.
It's a lot to process, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the negativity.
It's true. We've seen some, pretty blatant examples of greed, corruption, and disregard for human life.
Yeah.
But I think amidst all that darkness, there are glimmers of hope. We've also seen examples of courage and resilience and people fighting for a better world.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's important to remember that the human story isn't just one of darkness and despair.
Right.
There's also an incredible capacity for good, for compassion, for change.
And I think that's where our earlier conversation about trust comes back into play. If we want to create a world where these negative stories become less frequent, we need to start by fostering a sense of trust in our institutions, in our leaders, and in each other.
But how do we do that? Especially when it feels like trust is eroding all around us.
Right.
You've got a former CIA analyst betraying his country, a pharmacy chain allegedly putting profits over patients,
Right.
a political figure making promises that seem impossible to keep.
Yeah, it's a valid concern. And there's no easy fix.
Right.
Rebuilding trust is a long and complex process, but I think it starts with each of us,
Okay.
in our own communities, in our own interactions.
What do you mean?
It's about making a conscious effort to be honest, transparent, and accountable in our own lives.
Okay.
It's about holding ourselves to a high standard of integrity and expecting the same from those around us.
So it's about leading by example.
Exactly. And it's also about being willing to listen to and engage with people who hold different perspectives, even when it's challenging.
Right.
Because trust is built on open dialogue, on understanding, on empathy.
That makes sense. But it's not just about individual actions, right?
Right.
We also need systemic change to address these larger issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to demand transparency and accountability from our institutions, from our leaders, and from the systems that govern our lives. We can't just rely on individual goodwill to fix these problems. We need to create structures and mechanisms that promote ethical behavior and discourage corruption.
So it's about a combination of individual actions and systemic change.
Precisely. It's a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
We need to work on changing hearts and minds while also working to reform the systems that shape our society.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific actions we can take.
Okay.
What can we do as individuals to promote trust and accountability?
Well, first and foremost, we need to be informed.
Oh.
We need to educate ourselves about the issues, to understand the complexities, to be aware of the different perspectives. And that means going beyond just the headlines, digging deeper, seeking out reliable sources of information.
So it's about being critical consumers of information.
Absolutely. We're bombarded with information from all sides these days, and it's easy to get caught up in the echo chambers of social media or partisan news outlets.
Right.
But to make informed decisions, we need to be able to discern fact from fiction, to recognize bias, to evaluate sources critically.
That's so important in today's world.
It really is. And once we're informed, we can start to engage in meaningful conversations with others, even those who disagree with us.
Okay.
We can listen to their perspectives, try to understand where they're coming from, and find common ground.
And that's how we start to bridge the divides that separate us.
Exactly. It's not about agreeing on everything, but it's about having respectful dialogue, about seeking understanding, about recognizing our shared humanity.
Okay, so being informed and engaging in dialogue are key. What else can we do?
We can also support organizations and initiatives that are working to promote transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior.
Okay.
There are countless groups out there fighting corruption, advocating for human rights, protecting the environment, and holding those in power accountable.
So it's about putting our money where our mouth is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can donate to these organizations, volunteer our time, spread the word about their work. Every little bit helps.
And what about holding our leaders accountable? How can we do that effectively?
That's where civic engagement comes in. We need to vote to contact our elected officials to attend town hall meetings to make our voices heard. And we need to hold our leaders to a high standard, to demand transparency, to call out corruption, to refuse to accept anything less than ethical behavior.
So it's about being active participants in our democracy.
Absolutely. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires active participation, informed engagement, and a willingness to hold those in power accountable.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about today. It's been a real eye-opener to explore these different stories and see how they connect to the larger themes of trust, accountability, and the power of individual actions.
I'm glad you found it valuable, and I hope it inspires you to think about the role you can play in building a more trustworthy and equitable world.
Because ultimately, it's up to each of us to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things. We need to be the change we want to see.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the headlines and for engaging in these important conversations. Remember, Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And never underestimate the power of your voice and your actions to make a difference.